Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. This has been quite an amazing year in terms of the resurgence of labor. Unfortunately, not so much in the media. When I was covering the UAW strike, I was surrounded by a litter of corporate stooges, in my opinion. But there is help on the way. Joining me now, Adam and Jacob. You are with the Valley Labor Report and you guys do labor coverage really focused on Alabama, but you talk about national stories as well. And I've been watching your channel, so everybody should subscribe to the Valley Labor Report. We'll put the link down in the description. But I wanted to have you guys on because I don't know. I mean, I've been in despair the last 2 3 years in the progressive wilderness. But the strike, starting with the John Deere strike, honestly, a couple of years ago that I covered in Iowa, Illinois, Amazon's union organizing, Starbucks union organizing, and now the UAW strike. It's been really refreshing. And I wanted to first tell the audience about yourself because obviously you guys have union involvement in addition to covering it.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. My name is Jacob Morrison. Appreciate the time. Like you said, I co-host the Valley Labor Report. Started it about 3.5 years ago with the president of a local machinist union. I am a member and steward of my local union, the American Federation of Government Employees, Local 1858. And I am recently the president of the North Alabama Labor Council. So labor councils are like the regional federation of unions. So I was elected by the delegates of the unions affiliated with our council to be the president, and really thankful for that, and looking forward to building the labor council and the labor movement here in North Alabama. We've got a Toyota factory just right down the road from us, and looking forward to helping the UAW there.
Hey y'all, Adam Keller here, and I co-host and co-produce the Valley Labor Report with Jacob here, and I have been involved in trying to build the labor movement in Alabama for about 10 years now. I got my start as a high school history teacher and got very activated and involved. It didn't take long as a classroom teacher to see that, things weren't exactly going great. And we had to do something. Somebody had to do something, and damn it might as well be me. And so next thing you know, I got involved in the local. I ended up working for the Alabama Education Association for over 5 years, representing the employees of Huntsville City Schools, and was very involved in my staff union at the time as well. For the last couple of years, I have been a stagehand with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE, Local 900. I serve as the political coordinator for the union here. Also a delegate and trustee to the North Alabama Labor Council that Jacob mentioned. And really my whole thing in my adult life and what drives me is trying to build people power here, particularly in the South, in a place like Alabama, where we have a rich history and a rich legacy of people power, of interracial solidarity, of labor organizing, of real militant organizing. And that's a history that a lot of folks don't realize because, of course, Alabama has been so dominated by reactionary, powerful, wealthy interests for so much of our history. But, there are a lot of folks out here who believe that a better Alabama isn't just possible, but it's necessary. And it's an honor to try to do the work to make that happen.
It's interesting. We'll get to kind of the takeaways of the UAW strike, but obviously the next frontier for them is trying to unionize these non-union auto shops, and they're starting with the Volkswagen in Chattanooga, in Tennessee. I interviewed a few workers from there, and obviously it's a different ball game when you're focusing and traveling down south to overcome a lot of the obstacles, including right to work. Kind of the propaganda steeped into the culture against unions. Can you kind of talk about, I believe Alabama is one of the lowest union percentage, unionized workers percentages in the country. Can you kind of talk about what it's like trying to organize there? Because I do believe once you get past that kind of cultural roadblock and a lot of the conservatism, people, even rare ribeye Republicans, are actually pretty perceptive to the ideas and the underlying solidarity behind a union.
You're right. There's a lot in the culture that is that pushes people away from unions here in in the South and in Alabama. I think that's changing. I was talking to somebody in the local DSA chapter about the union campaign, and they told me about how they know somebody that works in the Toyota factory, and they really excitedly sent them the news like, hey, the UAW is like openly said, come on, join the union, sign the card. And this Toyota worker, not really a political person, not in DSA, the guy just happened to know him. He was like, oh yeah, we done been known. I already signed the card, and so have a bunch of my coworkers, right? So that's really great to hear that's already kind of there's already a lot of momentum there that I don't think would have been so easy to generate in the past. Alabama has, like Adam said, Alabama has really a unique history in the South. We have still currently the highest union density rate in the Southeast, in the Deep South. And at one point, there was at least a claim in Walker County to be the highest union density highest union dense county in the country. Due to the mine workers. So, the coal miners here in Alabama really paved the way for interracial unionism back in the 1890s. So Alabama has kind of a unique history in the South. There's been more of the more pushback maybe here than there have been in other places. But
you had the Warrior Met strike
yes.
for over a year. Yeah, the coal workers.
Yeah. Here recently, the longest strike in the history of the state is what the UAW believes the Warrior Met strike was, and that didn't end the way that we would have hoped, but certainly the fighting spirit that those coal miners had and their families especially. The Women's Auxiliary played a very, very key role in that strike. Really harkens back to some of the more radical and militant strains that go through Alabama. But like I said, there's there's been a lot more kind of, actually, ironically, people coming back to our roots of people power and pushing back against the corporate elites. And we're looking forward to building on that and kind of fanning those flames, so to speak, because like Adam said, it's necessary. Auto workers in the state of Alabama make less than they did in the early 2000s. Even back then, the pitch in the 2000s, when Alabama was first starting to try to get into the auto industry in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, the pitch was, we make low wages. You don't have to pay our people much. We'll do it. We'll do it for real cheap. And they make less than they did then, today in 2023. And so, there's a real need to push back against it. And people are, there's a lot of folks that are waking up to that.
And I think also, I wonder what you think. I remember the Bessemer Amazon campaign, which was the first union drive. Well, not the first, but the first in the last few years, union drive. And it was really, I think a lot of workers were interested and might have been open to it. It ended up failing. But Amazon was like really one of the only jobs in that area. Mm-hmm. There was not a lot of opportunities. And you could say that for a lot of areas in Alabama and other kind of southern, more rural areas. When you have like Amazon or these big corporate Goliaths, their union busting is very effective because there's not a lot of other options. So they pour in their union busting consultants and, their surveillance and their, shady mailboxes that you vote in. And before you know it, a lot of voters are voting no. A lot of workers are voting no, not necessarily because they're against a union, but they're scared of losing their jobs.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, Amazon pays more than the other jobs in the area, and they do that for a reason. They pick these poor areas to do that in. And there is a hearing on the most recent election that's going to be happening in January. There were 400 challenged ballots, and so I think we're finally going to get a resolution to the most recent election in Amazon and Bessemer. But yeah, it was there was a lot of support there, and the last election was only lost by less than 100 votes, if I'm remembering right, Adam, right?
So, and I was just going to add that in addition to the union busting that you see from these corporations, they get full support in that activity from Alabama's politicians. And right, you mentioned Chattanooga, the Volkswagen plant there, and that was a big problem earlier in that campaign. Years ago, was the Tennessee governor. I mean, the governor of the state explicitly threatening workers and telling workers to vote no. And so, we have very, very right wing politicians who dominate our state governments down here, and they are aligned with these corporate interests. And, that has been the economic model of pitching to corporate America that you can come to the South. You don't have to go all the way to Mexico, right? You can just make your last stop on the way to Mexico and stop in a place like Alabama, Mississippi, and try to exploit the natural resources, exploit the labor force, pay lower wages than up north or out west, and take advantage of union hostile environments. And we've union hostility has been ingrained here in Alabama and in states in the South for a long time. It's been violently repressed. There is a long line of union organizers and activists who've been murdered in the service of the movement here over the years. And, so it has been squashed very violently and consistently over the years. And yet here it is in 2023, about to be 2024. Workers are still on the move. Workers are still organizing. And we have exciting campaigns across the state and across the South. And I think that is really promising for the movement, because the labor movement of the United States, and I would argue of the entire world, cannot afford for the U.S. South to be a refuge for low wages, lax regulations, hostile politicians to workers. We can't afford to let the South be that kind of leverage that corporations use against their union workforces elsewhere. So I applaud the UAW for their focus on the South. And, I've seen some reports that this is arguably the biggest push to organize labor in the South since the 1940s. Since the Operation Dixie that CIO held back in like 46. So it is a big deal to see the UAW organizing in such a big way here in the South. And we've seen campaigns already underway in Alabama, Mercedes at Tuscaloosa, Hyundai in Montgomery, Toyota in Huntsville. So, definitely sending our love and solidarity and waiting to see how this is going to really transform our state and transform our region.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you guys, if you've paid attention since kind of the post Bernie left. I don't know if you guys consider yourselves on the left politically or whatever, but if you paid attention, there's been a lot of doom, gloom, cynicism, fighting, focusing on, the squad and, sellouts and all this. In my view, not enough focus on all the good things happening outside of electoralism. I'm not going to dress it up. Things are not, I don't expect, the rescue choppers coming from Congress or even one or two or three elected progressive politicians. But can you kind of talk about, to me, I've been telling my viewers, I think the real action and the real hope for actual structural change in wages, benefits, even, labor laws is going to come from organizing. It's not a coincidence when you look at that chart of like all the money being stolen and all of it going to the top 1%, that the corresponding chart is, the sinking of the Titanic, which was that union participation going down. So to me, if it's not as sexy, you got to roll up your sleeves. But if people want actual change that they thought was going to come from electing a president or Congress people, to me, they should get involved, even if it's not their workplace organizing. They should get involved with all these other campaigns, because It's the only thing I can see that is having results.
Yeah, you want me to jump in there? Yeah, I'll let you jump in a second, Jacob. I know you got a lot to say about that, but yeah, we definitely have that approach that electoral politics has its place, but where the rubber meets the road is in the workplace, right? That's where we spend most of our time. Um, I am a materialist, and I try to look at things from like our material standpoint, our material conditions, which means, how do we make a living? Well, we work for a capitalist. That's how the vast majority of us make a living, is selling our labor to a company. And so that's the relationship and the dynamic that is so important to understand and to organize around. And, I have definitely encouraged, and I think that what we do on the Valley Labor Report is encourage people to sure pay attention to electoral politics, go vote when you have the opportunity, by all means. But what's happening in between elections and what's happening with the working class as a class, that's what's important. And for me, if we're going to have any hope of responding to the multiple layers of crisis that we're facing, which is stark and deep and overlapping layers of crisis, if we're going to have any hope, it's going to be through a mass movement, a mass working class movement like we haven't seen since the 1930s through the 60s, right? That era that ebbed and flowed, obviously, throughout those 30-ish years. But you saw a real dynamic, large, mass working class movement that was able to extract concessions from the bosses and the politicians, that was able to win real wins for working people and deliver structural change, as you said. And so building that kind of interracial working class movement, that is, to me, the name of the game. That's what we have to be looking at. That's what we have to be focused on. That's what we have to be working towards. And you can't do that without organizing in the workplace and building up a labor movement that can be militant and progressive and ready for the fights that we already have, that we've been losing for so long. We have been losing as a working class in this country for 50 years. And a lot of us are getting damn tired of it. And we recognize that organizing our unions is one way we put power back into our hands and begin to shift things.
And you're right, Jordan, that it's really not a coincidence that, really one of the only periods in American history where we saw genuine shifts in economic power was the height of the power of the labor movement. Social Security, Medicare, civil rights, all of these things really kind of the cornerstones of, American economic life in many ways today happened during the height of the labor movement. And with the explicit support of the labor movement. The UAW was one of the major funders of the civil rights movement and the March on Washington. That was the UAW paid for a lot of the stuff, and the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters provided a lot of the transportation, right? This is a lot of the gains that, American working people were able to get was on the back of the labor movement. And, there's just so much good that comes out of working in the labor movement. I came from a kind of political place. I, was active in the College Democrats when I was in college. Father, forgive me for I've sinned. And I just didn't feel like I didn't feel like I was doing a lot. I didn't feel like I was like making anybody's life better. Right. And so when I got this job and there's a union there and I was able to participate in the union, work on grievances and, work out arrangements for people to like make their lives better, save their jobs in some instances. It's like, wow, I have literally made somebody's life better with my work. And then through that, you're also able to do some of the political education that is going to be necessary to get elected leaders that are going to do better by working people. And the bang for your buck is just definitely the highest in the labor movement as I see it. And it makes a lot of sense, because if you have an organized working class, then it's a lot more difficult for politicians to say no. Like if the railroad workers had more militant organization, where they were able and willing to carry out a strike over the arbitration, Joe Biden would have not felt like he could get away with what he did. Right. And, there are different opinions about what exactly all of the politicians should have done at each point. But, the fact of the matter is that happened because the railroad workers were not organized enough and organized on a militant enough basis. And that's what we've seen time and time again in history, is that workers get only what we are willing and able and have the power to fight for and take. Right.
Yeah.
The Flint sit down strike, that was one because the UAW and the CIO had the power to really screw over Frank Murphy, the governor of Michigan at the time, and Roosevelt, the president. Now, because they both knew that if we send in the National Guard, we're going to get absolutely destroyed in the next election, because we were elected on the backs of these people. And so we have to support them. Right. And so absolutely agree with everything that y'all said.
And I'd like to ask you, because obviously, when you look at the UAW strike, most important thing is the dollars and cents. What did workers get in terms of improvements? But I think equally as important was the psychological shift. Meaning, I've covered labor for a couple of years, and I've only known union bosses that are corrupt, complacent, and, basically palling around with the corporations. Meanwhile, here you had, I'm not saying Sean Fain's perfect. He's throwing contract offers in the garbage. He's refusing to show up to, shake hands with the CEOs for the symbolic photo op. I think, maybe 2-3 years ago, if UAW got a 10% increase offer, they would have taken it and said, live to fight another day. And I think his kind of militant approach really galvanized the troops and inspired people, because I saw it. I remember at the first day one of the strike, they had this big rally in Detroit, and I hadn't seen that many excited working class people since Bernie 2016. And, to me, that's really important. You could organize, but you have to have, energized and hopeful workers. And, unionized workers have not really been very hopeful. They've been cynical, rightly so, angry, rightly so. What are your thoughts on this kind of new, militant approach? Sure, there's a lot of UAW workers who felt they didn't go far enough. Obviously, it didn't pass 100%. There was a lot of workers who voted no, but I think, listen, unions were not battered overnight, and it was gonna take more than one contract to win back a lot of the things that were given up, including pensions and things like that. What do you think about? It's very clear Fain and the UAW decided to take a way more militant approach that they seem to be continuing now with their non-union organizing campaign.
Yeah, I agree, and I think what we're seeing is the power of democracy, as we've seen movements from below inside of labor. And for folks who maybe only pay attention to unions a little bit here and there, you may have missed that for years there have been internal battles inside the unions to make them more democratic, to make them more militant, to make them more progressive, to deal with some of these issues that we've been talking about. And with UAW, we saw the power of one member, one vote. Sean Fain was the first international president of UAW who was elected through a one member, one vote system. And we've seen the results there. And reformers have at least entered power through coalition and the Teamsters Union. Reformers are trying to make progress inside of IATSE, inside of UFCW, other unions. And so you're seeing I don't want to say it's all generational, but there is certainly a generational aspect to it where, millennials and Gen Z folks are coming in with a different energy, a different perspective, and are trying to revitalize these unions. And, you've got folks who've been trying inside the unions for years to have, this fighting spirit and to have this militancy and to have this willingness to go out and organize and willingness to fight. And so it's been really exciting the last couple of years to start to see some of that progress and to see the breakthroughs that we're starting to see. Coming out of the pandemic, it just seems like there's a greater militancy among working people generally. And we're seeing some of that translate into the unions themselves in terms of their leadership and their strategies. And we need more of that. Something that has happened throughout the history of our labor movement is periodically we have purged folks on the left and folks who are more militant or radical. And that's happened in various eras from various sources. And what has happened is a lot of times you're taking out the militant minority of folks, the folks who are the most active, who are most committed, and who, are the most on fire to do something. And a lot of times those folks have been actually excluded or kicked out of the movement. But you mentioned Bernie a couple times, and I think there is some relevancy there in that there does seem to be a left that is growing and recovering in this country. Whether it's you look at the roots of Occupy Wall Street and some of the education union battles of the 2010s, and then you see the Bernie movement, the growth of groups like DSA and others. There is a growing left in the country to some extent. It's still very small, of course, but it's growing. And I think an increasing number of people realize how important labor organizing is. And that if you are a, progressive person, you want to see change in this country, one of the best things you can do is get involved in your local union and try to make it better.
And I shouldn't frame it just on the left, because honestly, I think it goes both ways. I mean, I didn't, poll people, but I think a lot of the UAW workers I spoke with voted for Trump.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of union people or people that might be organizing now that maybe they're not like diehard Trumpers, maybe they're not diehard Burners, but are like somewhere in the middle, or they're kind of politically agnostic. So
right. I think that's a lot of it, actually, is a lot of folks are just disengaged, period. In Alabama, over 60% didn't even vote in our 2022 congressional elections, right? So more than 6 out of 10. And so disproportionately, those are working class people, right? Because rich people go vote, middle class people go vote. And so, I think there's a lot of disengagement, but that is one of the promises of unions, is that we unite people around our common interest, regardless of how you feel about electoral politics or cultural issues. Everyone wants to be treated with respect and dignity on the job. Everyone wants to be paid fairly. Everyone wants to retire with dignity and go home safely to their family and spend time with their family. And I think unions allow us to have those kind of bridge building conversations and bring people along for a common fight, even sometimes when it's, unusual bedfellows, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the unions are really kind of unique as a social institution in American society in that the members of unions do not choose who is in it, actually, right? It's actually the boss that chooses who's in it by virtue of choosing who to hire. And so we're not self-selecting in the same way that a political organization or even a church is. We are just the people who happen to be in the workplace, right? And so by virtue of not being self-selecting, you not only have the opportunity to talk to people that you might not otherwise would talk to because of your differing viewpoints about this or that thing, but in fact you have to actually you have to talk to people that don't think like you. Otherwise, you're not going to have a fighting union. You're not going to be able to win, because the only way that you can win is if you can get 70, 80, 90, 95, 99% of people on the same program, right? During your contract campaign, you've got to get everybody at least on the same program to the extent that, I'm willing to walk if the other side of the table doesn't meet these things. And that is a big ask. And that's an ask that really unions are the only institution in American society that are able to meet it, right? There's no other institution that can do that the way that unions can. And that makes them a really unique opportunity to build power in a community because you're able to build these relationships. And I do think that, if you actually look at you can look at people who support unions and who are active in their unions, and you can find people from all different, walks of life. I do think that typically the work of doing the work and leading the unions is left to the left typically, because there's not like an ideological commitment on these other things to unions as a class kind of thing. But you do find a lot of people from all these other walks of life. And in fact, one of the first interviews that I ever did on the Valley Labor Report was with two nurses who had just got through a union election together, two older men. One of them considered himself an ultra liberal and the other a constitutionalist Christian conservative, right? And so they're both talking to me about how, not only are they big supporters of the union, they were really big in the organizing campaign, but that it really kind of humanized each other to, they saw that, they're, my sisters and brothers in the workplace, they're not actually really that much different than me. We agree on more than we disagree on. And so at least, we can recognize that humanness in one another. And that's really cool.
Right. Well, I'm curious if you could kind of pull back the curtain a bit on the South in particular, because, viewers from the South might know, but you're dealing with some really rotten, corrupt politicians, the police. I remember in Bessemer, was it the local officials or the police who were like changing the traffic lights
Yes.
during the Amazon organizing campaign to make it, basically to help Amazon and slow down traffic or speed up traffic, one of those. I remember covering years ago in Birmingham, Alabama. Alabama is one of the few states where it's still $7.25 federal minimum wage. And Birmingham, which is majority black, they increased it to $10, but then the all-white legislature overruled that. So you basically have this super, super conservative, whether it's local politicians, your senators, your congressmen, police. Can you kind of, in your experience, what might people not know in terms of what you're up against?
Well, just another story along those lines is that, the police in the Warrior Met struggle gave emergency escorts to the scabs, and in fact gave coal striking miners tickets for going the speed limit in front of these scab escorts, right? So at one point they were going less than the speed limit, try to slow down these scab escorts. And so they got tickets for that. And then they said, okay, we're just going to go the speed limit, right? We're not going to let you speed down our roads, right? Where our families live. And they got tickets for going the speed limit because it was in front of an emergency escort. They were escorting scabs to work, right? And so not only are, you stealing money in through these tickets from striking Alabama coal miners, but you are using our tax dollars, the public money in the state of Alabama, to pay state troopers to get the scabs to work faster, and scabs who were in many cases, not from Alabama. They were from, I remember talking to union folks who would tell me through our show, hey, Warrior Met is here in Kentucky at a job fair. What's up with that? Right? Hiring scabs in Kentucky, in West Virginia, in Virginia, for work in Alabama. It's just crazy. And the overriding home rule, I think that really kind of puts the lie to the states' rights kind of stuff. It's not that there's not actually an interest in devolving government to the localist level possible. That's not like an actual principle that they have. They want to, where they can make life worse for everybody at the federal level, they'll do that. And if there's, moves to make life better on the federal level, they'll say states' rights. And then if, and then on down it goes, where they'll stop progress where they can and institute policies of reaction where they can, no matter where it is. And we saw that just in Texas, right? Where Austin said, okay, look, if you're going to do work in our city limits, Austin, Texas, right? I mean, one of the hottest places in the country, you got to give your workers the option. They don't even have to take it. They just have to have the option of a water break every 3 hours. And the Texas legislature said, no, that's some lib woke bullshit there, right? You can't, that's crazy. Giving workers water breaks. That's insane. And so it really is, there's just a lot that working people are up against in the state of in the state of Alabama and in the South more broadly. And, the only way out of that is organization and organization in our workplaces. And then, I think that can give rise to more political organization, because really to a large extent, the South is just as, gerrymandered and suppressed as it is, reactionary in its politics. I mean, if you look at Mississippi is 40% black, right? Mm-hmm. They vote for Democrats, like a lot of them. And even in where they put up totally uninspiring gubernatorial candidates, they come within 4 points, right? The Democrats just aren't putting up anybody that's galvanizing a majority of Mississippians. The last guy that they put up, Brandon Presley, his claim to fame was like, I'm like Elvis's first cousin or something like that, right? His first ad in the gubernatorial campaign in the state of Mississippi, one of the poorest, literal third world poverty that they have in the state of Mississippi. And so you would think, okay, this guy, he's running as a Democrat, maybe he's progressive. There's a lot of problems in the state of Mississippi. What is he going to highlight in his first ad? He wants to cut the car tag tax in half. That was his first ad, and he did that by getting a chainsaw and cutting a car in half. And that was his first ad. And then he also said, I'm pro-life too, and I'm pro-gun, and I'm a Democrat. Look at me. Isn't that crazy, right? I mean, and we've seen that campaign so much in the South. That happened in 2018 in Alabama with Walt Maddox, the Democratic mayor of Tuscaloosa. He ran the exact same campaign, and it doesn't win every time. So we have to do something different, right? Because the backwards policies of the Republicans are not going to make life better for people in the South, and the backwards policies of the Democrats that we have here are not going to do it. But people just aren't interested in voting for Republicans who have a D next to their name, right? If they want to vote for a Republican, they'll vote for a Republican.
Absolutely. And my last question, I'd like to ask you guys, because I don't think this is talked about a lot. Obviously, the focus on renewing labor is to improve our lives. But one thing I've noticed, I covered UAW strike in 2019, 2023, John Deere, a bunch of them, is, these are kind of shitty times for a lot of people. There's mental health problems all over the country, loneliness, opioid abuse. I mean, we could go down the list. And I really think unions kind of create a real bridge and community. I've been in union halls where you could tell that these people are not just colleagues, they're like brothers, sisters, fathers, mother, unofficial, not by blood, but it really fosters community. And I know a lot of my viewers even say, I just sit at home most of the day, or I'm disabled, or all I do is work, but I don't have much connectivity in my life. And I really think that's another reason, besides getting involved to improve your wages and benefits, that organizing impacts. It's kind of helping foster that connectivity, so people could get off their phones and the gadgets and, feel a little bit more connected to your fellow, man and woman.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I think that, we call each other brother and sister and siblings and kin in the union movement. And that's not just for show. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And when folks feel it, they really do feel it, and sense that family belonging. And something I think that's really important is when you're sharing a struggle, when you're organizing together for a common cause against common enemies, it builds a relationship that is strong and unique in a way that, other relationships don't necessarily translate to. And it's not to say that, you organize a union in your workplace and all of a sudden you've got all these new best friends, right? But you're going to have a relationship and an experience with these people that's hard to replicate, and that will bring you closer to each other. Because solidarity is about understanding an injury to one is an injury to all, and that what happens to your brothers and sisters is relevant to you, and what happens to you is relevant to them. And you have to be willing to fight for other people, even the folks that you don't know, because you share those common interests. And I think there's something really powerful about it, because I think, as you touched on, there is a profound sickness in this society, and it manifests in a lot of different ways. Folks are alienated, folks are isolated, folks are disconnected, folks are struggling, but labor has that power to bring people together, and to foster that solidarity. And I think solidarity is a noun and a verb, and you can both live it and feel it, breathe it. And the more you experience it, the more it feeds into it, right? It's like once you've gotten a taste of that, once you've marched on the boss, or you've marched into a school board meeting with your coworkers, or you've carried out some sort of collective action, even something really small, maybe you all wore red on Friday. But when you do that, and you do that with your coworkers, it can be very powerful. And so I do think there is something to it. I think when we look at the history of the labor movement, when we were at its peak, we were much more connected with our fellow humans, frankly. And I think this is, one way we're going to bring those connections back, is building our relationships, because you can't unionize anything without building relationships, without listening and talking. And so I really do believe it is part of the solution to the, profound spiritual and just general sickness that we experience here in the United States.
And, how could a struggle like a strike not bring people closer together, right? I mean, there's a real, there's a real difficulty in a strike, right? I mean, a strike is, there's something that's, no doubt like romantic about going on strike, but it's also, that's something real that you can't just go into.
There's a lot of it that's not romantic. I mean, I'm out there. There's people in the 2 a.m. shift, the 5 a.m. shift.
I know people that I know people that have lost houses because of a strike, right? Have lost cars because of a strike. And they're still, really strong union folks. And that takes something. We talked to, when we just got done with a marathon fundraising stream for some striking workers. And we talked to a coal miner from Britain who is not allowed to fly because he's a convicted felon from the strikes in the 80s, from a frame up. He was beaten in the strikes. The coal mining industry was completely shut down by Margaret Thatcher, and he's still, a very strong union advocate to this day. And so it really creates, in some cases, lifetime bonds. There was a paper mill in Jay, Maine, that went on a 14-month strike back in 1987, 88. And that mill just shut down last year. And to this day, and after the strike was lost, they were permanently replaced, the striking workers, and the union was decertified. And but some of the old heads from the union, they bought the hall from the International, and they still show up every single day to drink coffee together. Like there's less of them than there used to be. A lot of them are not with us anymore, but there's still like a dozen of these old folks that get together, and that's their community. Every single morning they get together and they drink coffee at 9 a.m. And like, that's really cool. And that's something that a lot of folks don't have anymore, especially, like you said, with the decline of unions, churches are also declining, and there's a lot of problems with churches. But like, I grew up in a church. I'm not religious anymore. I don't go to church anymore, but there is something that provides for people. And when you don't have it, and you're not able to replace that with any other community, it's not good for people to be alone. It's not good at all. And so where unions can fill some of that social life as well as the economic life is really important. There was a time when unions actually did that. I was, reading about the history of the paper unions. There were union halls across the country that acted as the centers of the community. They would have plays, they would have dances, they would have all of this sort of stuff in the union halls, right? And that's something that unions don't even do today anymore. But would be great if we could bring that back to foster more of that fraternal feeling that even in the unions to a certain extent, I think we've lost.
And that to me is what really scares the hell out of the corporations, because they want to divide and conquer. And they want to splinter workers, demoralize workers, and have them fighting each other rather than them. Absolutely. Tell people what they can find at your channel, Valley Labor Report. Putting it up on the screen now. Everyone subscribe. You cover labor mostly, but other kind of stories down in Alabama too. Tell people a little bit about your channel.
Yeah, so we, the Valley Labor Report, you can find it on YouTube. We also have a website, tvlr.fm, where we have a couple of newsletters. We do Last Week in Southern Labor, where we take a look at all of the NLRB filings from the last week, some, bargaining updates that we get from unions, some legislative updates, and then Boss Watch, where we basically go through, Department of Labor, OSHA, EPA, and take a look at what Southern bosses were doing that they got caught in the last week. And so those are a couple of newsletters that we do. But yeah, we do a lot of, Southern stuff. We're on the radio on 3 radio stations in the South, in Alabama and Louisiana. We hew really tightly to labor, but like you said, we branch out some and talk politics. We definitely consider ourselves of the left, and so we approach it from that kind of perspective. But we try to be. We feel like. I feel like we're pretty ecumenical in our political outlook and the stuff that we put out. But it was really born in large part of a need that we felt, an educational need that we felt wasn't being met. There's a lot of folks come out of college, they come out of high school and they couldn't even tell you what a union is, right? Much less that it offers a good career path in a lot of instances. And so, we wanted to be on the radio and for that reason, because we wanted to kind of be where folks are. We're on the same station that Sean Hannity started on, actually. That's basically what you'll get. We're also TikTok.
I'm glad you're doing more good for the world than Mr. Hannity.
Yeah, that's
trying to.
That's the plan.
Yeah, we're definitely trying to.
And anything else you think we should mention?
I just was going to say that really what motivates us is that we recognize that bosses have media. Working people need media too. Particularly here in the South, because of the overwhelming amount of propaganda that people are exposed to. We want to amplify the voices of working class people here in the South. We think that's important. We think it's critical to the future of this country. And so we do what we can every week just to get the message out about solidarity, about collective organization, about what's happening in the world from this perspective of labor folks in the South, and really just honored and appreciative of everyone who has tuned in, everyone who's supported us. We're just a grassroots project that has tried to grow over the past couple of years. Really, proud of the success we've had, and looking forward to a big year in 2024, because, what if these kind of messages dominated the airwaves? What if instead of reactionary, divisive garbage, that was pumped on the airwaves 24/7. What if you heard union folks talking about the power we have when we come together for our common interest and fight back for a better world? So that's what we're trying to do, and really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you today.
Amen. If there is a God, I hope he's listening. We'll stay in touch. Definitely, folks, subscribe. It is not easy on YouTube to grow covering union stuff. YouTube's algorithm does not like that and does not recommend it. So make sure you subscribe, check them out. And we'll definitely keep in touch, guys.